Hi there, hope you're well. In this video I'll be taking you through the full router bench build from start to finish. This has been a big build and is a much longer video than normal, and there will be a couple of breaks in it, as I'm sure we could all do with a breather. Now, in the interest of transparency, the milling motor and lift was supplied for review by Tabletop in Germany. I haven't been paid to make this video or to say nice things about the product. As a Tabletop affiliate, I may earn from qualifying sales, so be sure to use the offer code 10-minute workshop at checkout for a 5% discount on router lifts and lift and motor combinations, and I'd like to thank Tabletop for extending this offer. As I think I said in a previous video, the bench itself is a torsion box style that relies on strips of MDF because it's flat and stable, and with those strips connected by noggins to make a grid that's then sandwiched between a top and a base, all glued and screwed or nailed together. It's the stiffness of the MDF on edge that provides most of the strength, and I'm using 18mm throughout. Probably could have used a thinner material for the base, to be honest, but I had 18mm, so I'll use it. I've cut the base to size first, and then I'm cutting the remainder into 82mm strips for the grid. I want 100mm strips of birch ply for the bench sides, and then I can work my way through the cut list, getting everything to size. So after a little bit of careful cutting and trimming, we've got everything sort of laid out, following the plan, reasonably closely, not fanatically so. A lot of these are in just sort of by eye, by and large. And I'm down at this end of the workbench because I know this is particularly flat. I'm crawled around underneath it, hammering in little wedges and chocking things up to make sure it was properly flat. So that's why I'm down here. And these are just sort of, glued and screwed on. It's important to work from the inside out, if you see what I mean, because otherwise when this is this narrow, it's only 135mm, you could struggle to get a screwdriver in there. So what I've done the bottom section, I'll do the top section next, then I'll do the centres, and then we can combine those two together fairly easily. And then we can put the outsides on. That sides are looking pretty good. I think I said before I used birch ply. Decided to use birch ply for this. That'll come along very nicely. And then that'll have a fibre colour top on it. So, a bit more of this to be done. Talk amongst yourselves. And we'll see you in a minute. With the torsion box framework glued and screwed, I can line it up carefully with the sides of the base and mark the central area that needs to be cut out. This is a bigger area than the actual router lift cutout because I want a bit of room around the motor. Making sure that I'm not cutting through the bench, I'm using my wayside jigs to make the cutout and finishing off the corners with a pull saw. Apparently Festool jigsaw blades have the same curve as their track saw blades, specifically so they can finish off cuts like this. The things you learn. Shame I don't have any, really. We can call that a success, I think, certainly up to a point. Obviously need to get this flipped over and glued and screwed and all that. Before we do that, I'm just going to use this half as a template to figure out where I want the cutout to be in the full size tabletop. So first I need to clear that tabletop, get that in, because obviously that's going to go underneath, but it will just give me an area to work to and a centre, so I can get that one in the centre of this, so I know that the router and the lift are going to fit nicely. So that's what I'm going to do. The coloured MDF top overhangs at the back. The base will be fixed to a wall plate, so I'm using a scrap of 18mm to gauge that, then centering the base and marking the position with tape, then drawing on the diagonals to make centering the router lift easier. With that marked out and the top put to one side, I can get on with the base. First marking where the ends of the torsion box come to, then flipping it over and joining the marks. Applying some glue and then screwing the top down using the lines to make sure I hit the grid. Birch ply outer next, starting with the ends, just glued and nailed. And then the faces nailed on at the front, but screwed on at the back, as the back will be bearing the weight of the whole bench. Alrighty, that's gone together pretty well. Birch ply is looking nice on the outside. I've put little plywood corners in to make it easier to screw the legs in from underneath. I'll put one in the far side because although I have a cabinet at that end, I want to put a temporary leg in there before I get that done, because that'll be in another video. One thing I do want to do with this before we go too much further, the router lift, thing of beauty that it is quite chunky, it's quite thick, and this combined with the little sleeve that you put in for the grub screws to bear against amounts to close to 10mm. Now, on a single piece of 18mm board, take 10mm off of that and you get left with just 8mm. It's quite a weighty thing with the milling motor, the router as well. So I'm going to double that up just on the inside where that's going to be cut away, just to make it a bit chunkier, make it a bit beefier. But in order to do that, I need to flip this over, with the top as well. So that's what we'll do next. I've moved the base out of the way and put the top face down on the bench, again using an 18mm gauge against the back edge. Back at the MFT I can cut a piece of bench top to size and glue it in with a couple of screws added in there for good measure. And a heavy weight too, why not? I've drilled a hole in the base for cable access, and with the glue fully set on the top insert I can do the same in the top. Let's hope they line up. Screws out of the insert, and yes, they line up okay. The router lift needs a 15mm rebate, so I'm using a piece of scrap to mark that on the tape, and then cutting it out with a plunge saw and the waist side jigs combination. I use these a lot. With the top put aside, I'm cutting some scraps of 12mm MDF to make a simple template for the rebate, and just edge gluing these together with tape as clamps. Don't be fooled, once the glue is set, this is immensely strong, and I'm perfectly happy to just clamp this in place by the edges to route the rebate. I've set the router depth to the plate and inset plus a fraction more, you'll see why later, and I can route out the rebate in a couple of passes. I really must get my hands on that extra dust collection dingus for that router. A rebate done, and I can just check it quickly, then pull it apart for a proper test. Okay, so I've popped over to this side of the bench quickly, just so I can get the thing sitting in there properly. Oh, this is a lovely, lovely piece of kit. Hang on. There's a little sort of metal gasket thing that goes in there, and then this just drops in. Sweet as anything. And there are little grub screws in the corner. It's pretty good actually. You can just raise it up very slightly if there's any kind of catching or snagging on that. So that's working out really well. I'll be adding a couple of short lengths of T-track for the fence. I've marked the positions roughly with tape, and I'll route those out now, making sure we get a nice snug fit. And trimming the track to length, actually slightly short of the rebate for reasons that will become clear later. Back to the base now, and I'll be fixing it with peanut connectors to a plate on the wall. Peanut connectors are immensely strong and will lock the bench in place, unlike, say, a French cleat. I'm marking the positions on the plate and the base, then drilling and routing as needed. Then fixing the plate to the wall. Time to fix the top to the base, and like the birch ply sides, this will just be glued and nailed. Earlier on I made a rod or story stick to mark the position of the torsion box strips, and I'm using that now to make sure that I nail into the strips and not just through the top into thin air. And while that glue dries, I'm scuffing up the T-track with a bit of sandpaper, applying a liberal amount of epoxy and gluing them into the slots I routed in the top earlier. It's a 5-minute epoxy, so I can get back and sanding in no time, just cleaning up the top ready for a coat of wax once it's in position, and yes, that is about as heavy as it looks. So the peanut connectors fit into a keyhole shaped slot and self-tighten as they slide along. The trouble is, because of the overhang on the back edge, I can't see where the keyhole slots are. Those peanut connectors also stick out by about 15mm, and that wall plate is 18mm. Yeah, you could see that coming, couldn't you? Unfortunately, a torsion box bench like this is as solid as anything, so there's only minimal damage to one corner. So we'll give that another shot, this time with a mark to show me where the connectors are. Yes, that's further over than I was expecting too, but we'll call that one a win and get a couple of temporary legs in there for support. Not bad. Not bad. Very nice. Good. Okay. We need to get that bolted in, we need to get the motor fitted, we need to get a fence made. Oh, and legs. Legs are always important. Indeed they are, and I'm gluing and nailing some of the coloured MDF into an L section, trimming that to length, and then adding a little fixing plate at the top. When the glue's set, I can jack the bench up a little, slide the leg into position and screw it on. This seems like a good time to apply a coat of wax to the bench. I'll buff this up later for a nice smooth finish, and then it's on to making the fence. Now the fence is made up of many small parts that need to be cut to size, holes drilled and slots routed. So while that happens, let me say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members whose continued support really helps me to keep things ticking along here and to keep making the videos that I want to make. And also, those guys have access to the back catalogue of free plans and ad-free versions of the public-facing videos. Channel members also have a weekly Week in the Workshop vlog-style video where I chat about whatever's been going on that week, with some behind-the-scenes and over-the-shoulder type video, as well as discussions of future plans and projects. Channel members also receive a 20% discount on all 10-minute workshop products, and they also have early access to those products. Indeed, some are currently testing final samples of my loose 10-inch jig, as I really value their feedback. If any or all of that sounds like your kind of thing, then come and join us as part of the 10-minute workshop team. We'd love to have you on board and taking part. That's probably enough of that though. Let's get back to that fence. So the fence is pretty simple, an L shape of birch ply that's clamped to the T-track in the bench. But I wanted to try something a little different on the face. You often have adjustable front faces so that you can close them up on the cutter. But because I have an NVR switch mounted on the fence, as well as little ribs for squareness, it can get a little bit busy back there to be cutting slots to try and make the fences adjustable. So I thought I'd try attaching the front faces with magnets. I bought the magnetic tape for my ceiling lights from First for Magnets, and they've kindly supplied me with these neodymium magnets for this build. Again, I haven't been paid for this or to say nice things about them, but if you are in the market for magnets of any kind, then use the offer code 10-minute workshop at checkout. We'll give you a 5% discount across the board at First for Magnets, and I'd like to thank them for extending that offer to viewers of the channel. I've routed a shallow groove into the face of the fence to take a thin metal bar. Then I've scupped up the surface of the bar with a sander and glued it in place with epoxy. So one of the fun things about magnets is that even though they have a lot of clamping power, 4.6 kilos of pull required for these, if you put them on a piece of metal, they grip well, but they can slide. And obviously, in a router fence, you don't really want things sliding. What I found though is that they actually come in, when they're sent to me, they come in these little metal packs covered in a really grippy kind of rubber, and I've stripped the rubber off one of those, and what happens is, with that between them, and that in place, that whole thing is absolutely solid. If you imagine four of those magnets, that's incredible. So I don't quite know what this stuff is, but I've stripped it. I'm going to find out. But I've stripped it off one of the little metal cases, and I'm just going to use a couple of strips of this, top and bottom, because we only need sort of 50 mil, 60 mil maybe of movement on each of the cheeks, each of the faces. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to stick these on with a 3M super strong double-sided tape. I'll link that up down below. But yeah. I've made the front faces in 12mm MRMDF, and I'm using a router with a 20mm bit to make cutouts to the right depth for the magnets. The notches on the base of the router make this easy to hit the mark. I'm scuffing the magnets up a little with sandpaper, then gluing them into the holes with epoxy. They are countersunk to take a screw, but I prefer to have the front faces in 12mm, and that's getting a little bit thin for a countersunk screw. Back to the birch ply parts now, and I'm starting with the dust extraction housing, again all simply glued and nailed together. And then attached to the base of the fence in the same way. Front face of the fence is next, and then I can add in the ribs that help ensure squareness and stiffness. While the glue dries on the fence, let's get the router lift and motor fitted. I've marked the corners of the metal insert with an awl, and I've drilled them out with a bit that's slightly larger than the bolts supplied. I've wound the lift down as far as it goes to make life a little easier for myself, and the excellent Tabletop instructions make it very clear which of the many fixing holes I should be using, C and E for this particular mount, and that can be bolted in easily. I'm adding a quarter turn at a time to the bolts on each side, but I'm honestly not sure how much of a difference that makes. I've upended the lift into the rebate to make it easy to add the motor, and Tabletop have provided this lovely milling motor by Suna, made for Tabletop expressly for the UK market. It comes with a UK 13 amp plug and everything, and critically, unlike some of the other milling motors, this one will accept a 1/2 inch collet as well as the usual 8mm and 1/4 inch. With the motor and lift joined together and dropped into place, I'm using the supplied grub screws together with a little bit of back and forth on the tightness of the corner bolts to level up the plate nice and flush with the bench surface. Back to the fence now, and I can pull the simple plug-in NVR off the old fence and attach it to the new with a couple of screws. Then move the whole assembly over to its new home. The fence clamps down with T-bolts in the T-track. That gap at the back means they can be removed completely if needs be, and then the motor plugged into the NVR and the extraction hose fitted. The router lift brings the collet right out of the table for easy bit changes, and the lift action is super smooth and easy to set and lock to the required depth. The fence slides and locks easily, and the front faces clip into place and stay put, making them safely adjustable for the best dust collection, whichever bit you're using. So there we are, that's our router bench finally done. It's been a bit of a long one, sorry about that. Sometimes it takes as long as it takes, and sometimes it takes longer than you think. I'm really pleased with how this has worked out. It's my first ever torsion box, and it's come together really nicely. It's about as flat as a flat thing, as flat a thing as you can make, to be honest, and the whole thing has come together really well. Fence is working out great, not completely finished yet. I'm still not, there's a little bit of cable management to do obviously, and I'm not sure if I'm going to continue to share the dust collection with a miter saw or dedicate one to this. I've got a cabinet with drawers in to go down here. I'll be making that next week, so be sure to join me for that one. And now in actual use, I really like having a front sort of lip on the benches, so that featherboards and that sort of thing can just be clamped on like that, and the same on the fence, to be perfectly honest. You don't need anything fancy. That works out really well. So overall, I'm really pleased with these. There'll be plans available for these, for the fence and the bench and the drawer unit when I get the drawer unit done. So they'll be out next week along with the cabinet and the drawers for this bench. So that's it though for this one. Thank you ever so much for taking a look. I'll leave it there and I'll see you next time. All right, take care.